I'm going to start by asking this question. Is sin fun? Is it enjoyable? Is it pleasurable? And one of the biggest mistakes that we make, I think, is telling people that it's not. Now, the spiritual consequences of sin are not good. Even the physical consequences of sin can be bad, eventually. But people don't do it and then do it a second time and then do it a third time because they don't like the way it makes them feel. The reason why they do it over and over and over again is why? Because they enjoy it. And so, when we talk about physical pleasure, when we talk about, as some would word this, self-indulgence being what he's talking about here in these verses, understand that there is legitimate pleasure that comes to the body from some of the things that he's talking about. And this isn't all dealing purely with those acts of immorality that we think of, although I think some of it is. There's other things that he talks about gaining enjoyment from in life. But he's talking here about just going out and doing and taking in whatever it is that you desire with no limitation and no discipline. And so listen, he said, I said in my heart, come now, I'll test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. So here's the first thing, okay? He's trying to determine what the purpose of man is, trying to determine what life's all about, why we're here, all those things. He says, okay, the first thing I'm going to do is test this concept of pleasure. I'm just going to enjoy myself. I'm going to, by the way, is this an odd philosophy of life? No, this is, in fact, a very common philosophy of life today. The idea of if it feels good, do it. And if it feels good, there must not be anything wrong with it. And if it feels good, it must not hurt anything. And you can just go on and on and on and on with the reasoning that goes behind all that. But that's what he's asking here, okay? I'm not going to refuse myself anything. I'm just going to do what I enjoy and bring pleasure to myself. But behold, he says, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it's mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine. My heart still guided me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. It's kind of fatalistic language there, but there's true, life is short. But he said, look, okay, I pursued laughter, I pursued wine, I pursued whatever would bring me pleasure because life is short. I made great works. What does that mean, I made great works? Well, okay, he did a lot of good things, a lot of big, grand things. He had some advantages, by the way, if this in fact was Solomon, and I'm personally persuaded it probably was. What else was Solomon besides very wise? Very wealthy and very powerful. And so he could do just about anything he wanted to, and he found success. And that's what he said, I made great works, I built houses, I planted vineyards for myself, I made myself gardens and parks, I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees, I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. So this test lasted for a while, right? He's not talking about something he just did for a week. He's buying people and putting them to work, and they're having children under his watch. And so I think this is somewhat reflective on past experience as much as anything else. So this is not a short time period. He's just looking at life in general. He said, okay, I brought all this pleasure to myself. And by the way, who wouldn't like to have people to do all their work for them? I mean, it's great to build gardens as long as you're not the one that has to go out there and till the soil and plant the trees and fertilize them and water them and tend to them. And much better when you have somebody do all that for you. And you can just walk around and enjoy it. I once told somebody, I said, I would love to have a horse one day, as long as I was one of those horse owners that could just own the horse and it could stay in somebody else's stable and they could take care of it and they could feed it and all I had to do was walk up there, get on it and ride it and bring it back in and then they took care of it again. That would be a great exercise of horse ownership. But all this taking care of it stuff, that's work and it smells bad and it's hard and it takes a long time and it's very expensive. Who wants that? It's great to be able to do all these great things and have other people to do the work for you. And he said, I did that. I did all this stuff, and I had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been born before me in Jerusalem. And so you have to understand, as he's defining himself as having more herds and flocks and possessions than anyone else, then he's saying he was what? The most prosperous and the most wealthy. I also gathered for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, many concubines, the delight of the sons of men. He enjoyed pretty much anything that anybody thinks is enjoyable. Shiny things, wine, women, songs. I became great, he says in verse 9, and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. He didn't lose this great wisdom that he had. It didn't just vanish from him. And so he's enjoying all of these things while still having his mind and wits about him. And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Now, here's the question for a minute. What he's saying is, the joy that I got from this was just the joy of looking at the produce of the labor. And there is some joy in that, is there not? Okay, I hate cutting grass. When I was 4, I begged and pleaded for the opportunity to do it. After it became my job, I didn't like it anymore. But you know what I really do enjoy? Looking at a properly manicured lawn. So after the work's done, I sit back for a few moments and enjoy that. How long does that last? Yeah, not very long. And that's the point about all these things. That's what he's saying. You know, really, the only benefit to them is that little moment of pleasure that you get. And then the pleasure's gone. And so let's assume, for argument's sake, that he was really good at raising grapes, and they developed really, really high-quality wine. And he enjoyed this wine, and it tasted really, really good. Then what happened? And that was it. Okay, how long does that flavor stay in your mouth? And then you drink more, right? Because it's gone, so I got to drink some more. That was good. I want some more of that. And then you actually get to a point where it don't even taste good anymore. So where's the pleasure in that at that point? And that's why I said I didn't withhold anything from myself. If my heart wanted it, I provided it. If I desired it, okay, that's what I'm going to get that for myself. I'm going to possess that for myself. But the joy of having it lasts for just a few moments. New cars. They're great and wonderful. And then they're not new anymore. I used to joke, my kids, I think, like to open new things more than they like to get new things. The excitement of opening it. And then they were done with it. They wanted the next thing. And that's the nature of this kind of pleasure. It's very fleeting. And it may last for a period of time. Or it may even come and go. I mean, I can imagine that as he has all these great palaces and gardens and pools and that there are days that he walks out and he looks and surveys it and enjoys it. Says, well, that's beautiful. And then there's other days he walks out and goes, what's the point in this? And that's exactly what he's talking about. When people pursue those kinds of things, if that's what they think that life is about, bumper sticker religion here, he who dies with the most toys wins. That actually was a bumper sticker. Sold enough that you saw them on the road. What he's saying isn't, that's not you do get some pleasure from them, but what I determined is whatever pleasure you enjoyed, that was the reward. You just got your reward. And then it's gone. I became great and surpassed all who were before me. I had more stuff than anybody, and the pleasure from my stuff was the total of the benefit from living that way. I considered all that my hands had to do, he says in verse 11, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. Now, don't read, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun, as if he's talking about things in broad, absolute terms. This is defined by its context. Nothing is one of those words that's defined by its context. And he's saying there's nothing really to be gained from living that kind of life. And by the way, there's never really any satisfaction in it either. The eye is not satisfied with the seeing, nor the ear satisfied with the hearing. We'll get to that, I think, a little later. But there's no real satisfaction in it either. And the only value to doing this is those brief moments of joy that you get from things, and then it passes. And so, self-indulgence or physical pleasure, that's not the purpose of life. Is it wrong to enjoy pleasure? No. There's no value in depriving yourself of good things. Now, there are some people who believe that. And that is an aspect of their practice of faith is, you know what, we're going to take vows of poverty. We're not going to own anything. We're not going to do anything nice. We're not going to wear anything nice. He doesn't say that that's the way to respond to this. This is about values and about what we pursue. And he said, look, when the number one thing that I decided I was going to pursue was just pleasure, whatever brought me joy, that's what I was going to pursue. That's number one on my list. What I found out was that was no way to live. So we can scratch off the list if we were to make a sentence that said, seek first blank, and we're filling it in trying to figure out what's most important in our life. We can scratch off that list, pleasure. Seek first pleasure doesn't get it done. Because some of these things, though they do bring pleasure, that pleasure is limited. And sometimes it bites in the end, even in time. Don't look upon the wine when it sparkles in the cup. At last it bites like a serpent. I've never in my life talked to someone who was in the midst of a hangover who said, boy, this is fun. I wish I felt like this more often. Unlike that, the comedian that is out of favor now with everybody, so you can't say who it is without getting in trouble from somebody. But Bill Cosby did a routine one time. And he was going through what it was like at the end of the partying night when you're hugging the porcelain throne and you're happy just to get that little patch of cold on your forehead. And he said, you make that promise, I'll never do this again. Until next week. Sometimes even in the immediate circumstances, there's a bad side. But just because of that doesn't mean that there wasn't a pleasurable side in the front end of it. And where we get ourselves in trouble is when we tell people, oh, you don't want to do that. That's not any fun. And then someone talks them into trying it, and they go, I don't know, that was pretty fun. Okay, so understand, sin can be fun. That doesn't make it good. Pleasure is not the most important thing. Enjoying yourself is not the most important thing. That's what he said. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. Enjoying yourself is not the most important thing. It's not wrong to enjoy yourself, but it shouldn't be our most sought after thing. Verse 12, so I turned to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there's more gain in light than darkness. Okay, verse 13 is an interesting verse to me because he acknowledges at the outset that there is some actual value to wisdom over folly. Let's define our terms for a moment. Let's start with folly. What is folly? Okay. Anybody have any other thoughts about how we can better understand this concept of folly? Understand it's being set against the idea of wisdom. Okay, foolishness. Somebody said foolishness. Someone said carefree. No limits. Anything else? Pointlessness. The Ziegfeld Follies. It's fun, but there's not really any substance to it. There's no reason for it. There wasn't a direction that was being... Those shows like that didn't have a story that they were telling or a point that they were making or anywhere that they were going. It was just a series of activities that were pointless. They had no aim or goal to them. As opposed to wisdom. Wisdom has purpose to it, right? It has an aim. And so he says, I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, just as there's more gain in light than darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, like that language, simply means what? You have your eyes in your head. The wise man's aware. Yeah, he's aware. But the fool walks in darkness. And yet I perceive that the same event happens to both of them. And I raised my heart. What happens to the fool will happen to me also. Now, keep in mind, he's already acknowledged that he possesses great wisdom. In fact, he said he possesses more wisdom than anyone who's been king of Jerusalem before him. He knows he's a wise man. And what he's saying here is, look, there's value in being wise. I understand that. I am wise. I have wisdom. I understand what's going on. I grasp things. These poor foolish people walk around in darkness. They have no idea what they're doing. And all of a sudden it hits him. Wait a minute. We end up in the same place. The same thing happens to both of us. What happens to the fool happens to me also. Why then have I been so very wise? I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just as the fool. Now this reflects back on what he said in chapter 1. And let's go back to chapter 1 for a minute and read a little bit of this. Starting in verse 9, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? It's already it's been already in the ages before us. There's no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of latter things yet to be among those who come after. And so we talked about that quite a lot last week, and we don't want to get and spend too much time in that conversation again this week, other than just to remind ourselves that what the point is being made there is that we forget things, and we forget things quickly. And the example that I used last week was Joseph. Joseph was a fascinating individual. Joseph was sold into slavery, and he ends up ultimately in the house of Pharaoh as the second most important person ruling the greatest nation of the time. And he saved the entire nation and actually much of the world, of that part of the world, from death. Joseph saved all of those people from death by getting them to prepare and ready themselves for a coming famine, so that when the famine arose, they had food. And they had plenty of food for Egypt. They had so much food for Egypt that even people from the nations around Egypt came to Egypt to ask for food, and they had it to give. And so he had saved all of that region from this terrible 7-year famine, and it was such a big deal that he became almost as important as Pharaoh himself. And the Bible says, then Pharaoh died, and there arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. In a generation, people forgot the man who had saved their life. That's what happens. And that's what he's talking about over here in chapter 2 when he's talking about this wisdom. For of the wise as of the fool there is no enduring remembrance. Solomon says, you know what, I got all this wisdom, but I'm going to die. And people are just going to forget it. So what good is it? We talked also about James's statement. Life is but a vapor that appears for a while and then vanishes. When it vanishes, there's no trace left of it. That is why God has put in place a weekly memorial of the death of Jesus. If we didn't do that, we would forget. We would forget about what Jesus did. We would forget about Jesus. We have to purposefully do things to remind ourselves and be reminded about God and what he has done, or we will forget. That's what he's talking about. It's going to happen to me too, just like the fool. The fool dies, people forget who he is. He said, I'm going to die, people are going to forget who I am. The contributions that I think I'm making to the world are going to be gone. There is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. So I hated life, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity in striving after the wind. Now, do you remember where chapter 1 ended? Verse 18, for in much wisdom is much vexation. Having your eyes opened and being able to see what is, this is where it can bring you. So I hated life. Because all he saw was the pointlessness in everything that was going on. Even in the things that he was doing. He said, I'm just going to die like the fool. And what I contribute to the world is going to vanish. And it's not any different for me than it is for him. So I hated life. Now, when we are so focused on the value of lucidity, the ability of ourselves to be able to understand and know, and there's a lot of people who take great pleasure in the idea that they understand better than everyone else around them. Now, usually they don't. That's another story. But almost everybody thinks that they do. And what he's saying is, you know what? If you actually are pursuing lucidity, the ability to have your eyes open to see what's going on, to understand things, all it's going to lead you to is to hate life. So we can scratch that off of our list of what needs to be first. Seek first wisdom. Nope, that's not it. That's going to bring me to the grave just like foolishness would. I might have a little bit easier time getting there. Is that number one? There's a whole thing last week about that. All right. 18. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. So he's amassed all of this wealth and built all these gardens and these pools and these buildings and done all these great works, and he's got all of this massive estate, and he realizes, wait a minute, I'm just going to die, and somebody else is going to have all this. Who knows whether he'll be wise or a fool? Listen, not only is somebody else going to be controlling my stuff when I'm gone, but it may be a foolish man and he may squander it. Yet he will be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. So he said, okay, we're putting these two things together. And he says, okay, I've amassed all this stuff. I've used my wisdom to gain all this stuff. Having it is vanity. The wisdom that brought it is vanity. And now I realize that the guy who takes it after me may be an idiot and he may lose it all. Where's the value in that? He'll be the master of all for which I toiled. So I turned about and gave my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. It's interesting that he adds that. This is not just vanity and striving after wind. This is a great evil. This is just wrong. That this stuff that I worked so hard for is going to be left to someone who did nothing. For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is vexation. Even in the night his heart does not rest. I skipped a verse, didn't I? What has a man from all the toil and striving of heart which he toils beneath the sun? For all his days are full of sorrow, and his work is vexation. Even in night his heart does not rest. This also is vanity. There's nothing better for a person than he should eat, drink, and find enjoyment in his toil. This also I saw is from the hand of God. For apart from him, who can eat or who can have enjoyment? For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he's given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give to one who pleases God. This also is vanity and striving after the wind. We don't have control over so much of what goes on in the world. We don't even have control over whether or not we're wise or not. Where does wisdom come from? Where does knowledge come from? Where does joy come from? Listen, if it came from me, I would be wise, I would be knowledgeable, and I would be happy all the time. Problem is it doesn't come from me. And I don't control everything. And so if my life is built around having these things, it's nothing but striving after the wind. It's vexation. It's troubling. It's bothersome. There's nothing better, verse 24 says, in a person that he should eat, drink, and find enjoyment in his toil. Don't read this as eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. I don't think that's the point he's making. I think he's making a much closer point to the New Testament point that we should learn to be content in whatever circumstances we're in. We should learn to be happy with what we do and with where we are. Yes, ma'am. Yep, I agree. He was expressing and writing down, by the way, his knowledge and wisdom so that it wouldn't be lost when he died. So that we actually could gain from it. By the way, I'm convinced that he was inspired of God with these things as well, and it was preserved by God. But what he's talking about here is the vanity of physical toil and work. That when we do that and we put, and I worked with people who would work 110, 120 hours a week sometimes. I talked to a man one time. His child was graduating from high school, and he acknowledged to me, he said, I don't even really know my child. My child's already graduated from high school, and I've not really spent any time with my child. All I've done is work. When we toil and toil and toil and amass and amass and amass, he says, you know what I realized? I'm just leaving it to somebody else who didn't work for it. What's the point in that? And so it's not about even what we leave for those that come after us. That's not number one. When I look at the aim and purposes of life, it's not the fruit of my labor. And me being in a position to give something to those who live after me. What we need to learn is to be content. And to realize that physical pleasure and a keen mind and the fruit of our physical labor is not the main purpose of life. Now, is there anything wrong with working hard? Is there anything wrong with having stuff? Is there anything wrong with enjoying things? No. But there is everything wrong with making them the focus and purpose of your life. Yes, ma'am. If the Bible doesn't say it, I don't know. That's what I have to say.